Quite often in life, one of the biggest complaints that we have is that people change. Family, friends, lovers. But there are some people who do not change, and Nvidia is one of them. So, welcome to PC Species and our review of the RTX 5060 Ti. The story here remains the same: mediocre GPUs for exorbitant prices. Now, today we have a lot of charts for you. We have gaming performance, we have pricing, we have cost per frame, and even some productivity benchmarks. But before we get into those, there are some general problems with the 5060 Ti that I'd like to discuss with you. So the very first problem that I have is the nomenclature. First of all, 5060, 5060 Ti, and there are going to be supers as well. So this gets a little confusing, but more than that, the same model in two variants, 5060 Ti 16GB and 8GB. Now this causes a lot of confusion, and people end up buying the 8GB variant instead of the 16GB and basing their purchase on the reviews of the 16GB variant. Now this is not something that is too uncommon, because me, who does this for a living, or at least wants to do this for a living, also ran into this problem. When I was searching for the prices online, sometimes the search for a Ti variant would throw a non-Ti variant, and sometimes the search for a 16GB variant would bring up an 8GB variant. So this is a problem. Secondly, the problem is with the 8GB variant specifically. It is priced over 40,000 rupees in India, and in my opinion, above 30,000 rupees. If you are paying a single penny, you deserve more than 8 gigs of VRAM. And even the 30,000 is too high, but looking at the market nowadays and the availability of GPUs, I'd say that 30,000 is alright. But if you pay anything over 30,000, you deserve more than 8 gigabytes of VRAM. Now, in terms of the kind of problems that 8GB variants will throw up, I'd say that even some games running at 1080p nowadays demand more than 8 gigabytes of VRAM. So as soon as your VRAM is saturated, the game assets are loaded on the system memory, which is much slower than VRAM, and that causes performance issues, mainly frame time inconsistency and stutters. More than that, the 5060 Ti has 8 PCI Express lanes. Now, when we introduced the 5060 in a few videos ago, so I specifically mentioned that the 5060 Ti should not have the same problem as the 4060 Ti, that was 8 PCI Express lanes. Now, I'll tell you about the problems it causes. So, when you're running the 16GB variant, it is running on Gen 5. Even if it has only 8 lanes, it does alright. Now, you do not run out of video memory that quickly on the 16GB variant. Now, imagine you have an 8GB variant and you run out of VRAM. So the assets go to the system memory. Now what happens is that if you're running Gen 5 X8, the experience is going to be choppy. But if you go down to Gen 4 or Gen 3, it is going to be downright unplayable. So that is a big problem with the 5060 Ti series. Now I'm going to mention the biggest problem that we have with the 5060 Ti series, and that is AMD. More specifically, the 9060 XT 16GB variant. Other than that, in the graphs, you are going to see the 8GB variant of the 5060 Ti as well, but it is to be avoided at all costs. Its presence in the graphs is purely for academic purposes. The graphs only show average FPS. It is not going to talk about the performance issues, the stutters and the frame time problems that you are going to run in with the 8GB variant. Now let us get into the benchmarks. Counter-Strike 2 1440p medium quality. The 9060 XT 16GB is 17% slower than the 1560 Ti. 5060 Ti 16GB. Call of Duty Black Ops 6 1440p extreme quality. The 9060 XT is 32% faster than the 5060 Ti. Cyberpunk Phantom Liberty 1440p high quality. The 9060 XT 16GB is only 2% slower than the 5060 Ti. Spider-Man Remastered 1440p very high quality. The 9060 XT is 2% faster than the 5060 Ti. And please keep in mind, I'm only going to be comparing the 16GB variants. The 8GB variant is there just for the heck of it. Hogwarts Legacy 1440p high quality. The 9060 XT is 5% faster than the 5060 Ti. Now let us move on to some ray tracing benchmarks. Alan Wake 2 1080p high quality, high ray tracing, quality upscaling. Now I've mentioned this in the previous video as well. If the FPS is below 60, I'm going to be using average FPS. If over 60, I'll be using percentages. So here, The 5060 Ti gives us 46 FPS and the 9060 XT just 31. Cyberpunk Phantom Liberty 1080p, Ray Tracing Ultra, quality upscaling. The 9060 XT is only 14% slower than the 5060 Ti. Spider-Man Remastered 1080p, very high quality, very high ray tracing. The 5060 Ti and the 9060 XT are even in this one. Black Myth Wukong 1080p, ray tracing, very high quality, very high ray tracing, quality upscaling. Now this game heavily favors Nvidia for some reason. So here the 5060 Ti gives us 51 FPS while the 9060 XT is stuck at just 26. So we've seen the gaming benchmarks and you've seen that the 9060 XT 16GB does really well against the 5060 Ti, and even in ray tracing Nvidia generally wins, but AMD is not too far behind. So that paints a very good picture for the 9060 XT, and it is going to get even better when we take a look at the pricing. I searched online for the lowest prices that I could find, and for the 5060 Ti 16GB variant, the asking price, the lowest I could find, was 47,800 rupees. That is nearly 48,000 rupees. And when you talk about the 9060 XT 16GB, we are getting it for around 36,689. That is around 37,000 rupees. So the price difference between the two of them is 11,000 rupees. So it is a no-brainer that the 9060 XT offers better value than the 5060 Ti, but the picture is going to get even clearer when we take a look at the cost per frame analysis. The first thing I'd like to mention before we go to the graphs is that I have separated raster and ray tracing averages. That is because some people do not care about ray tracing still, but if they do, they can take a look at those graphs. So what I did was, we had 5 raster titles. I averaged the average FPS, and that is what you see on the screen right now. And I did the same for ray tracing titles. So we have average FPS in 5 and 4 games for raster and ray tracing for all 3 of these cards. After getting the average FPS numbers in rasterization and ray tracing, to derive the cost per frame chart, I simply divided the price of the GPU by the average FPS that we got. If we take a look at the raster cost per frame chart, you can see that the 5060 Ti costs 320 rupees for every frame it renders, while the 9060 XT costs just 261 rupees. So you can see that in rasterization, the 9060 XT is offering great value compared to the 5060 Ti. When we move on to ray tracing, now here the picture improves for Nvidia, but even now, despite the advantages it has in ray tracing, the 5060 Ti costs 642 rupees nearly for every frame rendered in ray tracing, while the 9060 XT 16GB sits at 601.5. So based on the gaming performance, prices and the cost per frame analysis, it is clear that 9060 XT 16GB is a clear-cut winner here, at least in gaming. So if you want a gaming GPU under 50,000 rupees, you go with the 9060 XT 16GB variant. But there's more to this world than gaming, so now we are going to take a look at some productivity benchmarks. So we start with some AI workloads. First of all, image generation. Here the 9060 XT is 33% slower than the 5060 Ti. In text generation, it is 55% slower than the 5060 Ti. Now we move on to Blender, and in Blender rendering, and this is in terms of the time taken to complete the render, so lower is better. The RTX 5060 Ti took almost half as much time as the 9060 XT in completing the barbershop render. Now we move on to some creativity benchmarks. Puget Bench Photoshop. Here the 9060 XT is 1% faster than the 5060 Ti. In DaVinci Resolve, the 9060 XT is 6% faster than the 5060 Ti, and in Premiere Pro it is 13% slower. So as you can see, even in productivity, AMD has come a long way, but they still lag behind Nvidia in AI workloads and all of that. So what do we do? Which of these GPUs do we get? So if you're getting a GPU just for gaming, 9060 XT 16GB all the way. If you want something for gaming and a little bit of work, then too I'd suggest the 9060 XT, because the price difference between them is a little too much. Now, if you want something only for work and maybe a little bit of gaming, I'd say that you go with Nvidia, because there aren't any other options. So the 5060 Ti is only good if you're looking for just work, and that too serious work. So there you go. that was our review of the RTX 5060 Ti, and for the most part it is to be avoided, and only in some scenarios does it make any sense. Now we will have a lot of reviews coming up for you, so if you like the content, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next one.